We'll talk about that.
It's quite poor. Hello and welcome, my name is Ian and this channel is all about music and art, and in this series of videos we've been looking at what is happening regarding the music streaming in the UK. The UK Government's Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee have been looking into the ways that streaming platforms and large record companies manage payments to songwriters, musicians and performers. And on the 15th of October 2020, Parliament published a news article stating that the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee were going to inquire into the impact of the streaming on the future of the music industry. This article stated that the inquiry would consider whether the government should take action to protect the industry from piracy in the wake of steps taken by the EU on copyright and intellectual property rights. Now, I knew that some high-profile musicians and music industry types were going to be giving evidence to the committee. And the first of these meetings was on the 24th of November 2020. And it continued through December into January and February of this year, 2021. Now, these were long meetings lasting over 3 hours. So what I've done is I've edited them all down into shorter videos, and you can find a link to all the previous meeting videos in the description down below. I've also created an introduction for each section, and if you want to, you can skip straight past those bits to the questions by clicking on the timestamps. Again, all of this stuff is in the description. So in this video we'll look at the session from the 23rd of February 2021, and I thought it would be worth providing a short background to the witnesses giving evidence. So in this evidence session we have Paul Firth from Amazon, Horatio Guitares from Spotify and Elena Siegel from Apple Inc. Paul Firth took on the role of Director of Amazon Music International, responsible for non-US territories, in 2017. His previous position was as Director of Amazon Music Europe. London-based, Firth has worked at Amazon for nearly 10 years, starting off as Head of Buying for Music and MP3s at Amazon Music in 2011. Next we have Horatio Guitares, who is Spotify's General Counsel and Vice President of Business and Legal Affairs. Based at Spotify USA's headquarters in New York City, Horatio is responsible for overseeing Spotify's global legal, regulatory and government affairs, and serves as Corporate Secretary to its Board of Directors. And lastly, we have Elena Siegel, a wide respected figure in music industry circles. Elena was appointed as Apple's Music's first ever Global Director of Music Publishing in 2018. She's a qualified lawyer, originally joined Apple in 2006 after 4 years as an associate at a Los Angeles-based law firm. As legal director of iTunes International, she oversaw a range of legal and licensing matters for iTunes and Apple Music, and in 2015 she headed up global licensing for the launch of Apple Music itself. All sessions were chaired by Julia Knight, and the complete list of committee members and relevant links are in the description down below. This recording is made in agreement with the UK Parliament's terms and conditions, which state that I cannot alter the video or audio in any way. I can't use the material for satire or use it on a website or social media platform that promotes, encourages and facilitates illegal activity or encourage hatred and antisocial behaviour.
Clive Afford.
Thank you, Chair. Horatio, can I come to you first? And back in 2017, Universal negotiated a new license agreement with Spotify, which resulted in you being able to pay less in royalties to Universal if you hit certain targets. Did you achieve those targets and therefore pay less in revenue in royalties to Universal?
So in general, the metrics that labels focus on are metrics about addition of subscribers, conversion of ad-supported users into subscriptions, and other metrics like that that indicate the health of a business. And I think that in general, with respect to all the labels, we've been able to meet or exceed those targets over the years.
So the answer is yes, you did hit those targets. And so, I mean, how did the artists benefit from those reduced royalties that you paid to Universal?
We've been able to invest in growing the number of users, launching in new markets, and adding to the revenue that gets distributed among labels and publishers, and ultimately to the creators they represent.
So how does, I mean, in real terms, how does that really benefit the artists that produce the content?
The addition of, we've added tens of millions of users. In fact, both subscribers and free users since 2017. So I think the performance in terms of revenue generation has exceeded certainly labels' expectations during that period.
So what they would receive from you would match what you were able to reduce in payments to Universal?
I think in general, because we've grown the business and tapped into users in markets that we were not in before, I think on the whole, they're economically better off by having done the deal. And the other thing is, again, I go back to the notion of the fact that Spotify here is a representative of a class of music streaming companies that is in a unique situation. Our only path to sustainability and profitability is through the streaming of music and non-music content, audio. So being able to have enough of an operating margin that allowed us to continue to make investments in strengthening and growing the business is ultimately to the benefit of the rights holders and the artists they represent. Otherwise, if there wasn't a path to a sustainable business, then the number of streaming companies would be reduced, and that wouldn't benefit anyone.
So, just about that deal with Universal, how do you go about negotiating with a company with a financial stake in your company without that influencing the outcome of the negotiations?
I'm sorry, the beginning of your question, your volume went down a little bit, so I missed it. Would you mind restating it?
Yeah, certainly. It's just, how do you go about negotiations with a company that has a substantial stake in your company without that influencing the outcome of the negotiations?
We approach it as a partnership relationship. You emphasize the fact that if we do better, they will do better, and the artists they have signed will do better. And we try to appeal to the long-term strategic interest of the labels and their artists in doing that. It isn't an easy negotiation. Sometimes they take months. In some cases, they've taken years. They are very contentious negotiations, but we have been able, every time we've engaged in negotiations, not only with Universal, but with other labels around the world, ultimately we have been able to find common place. And you only need to look, I think, at the growth of the music streaming segment for evidence that, in fact, we are onto something that is beneficial for everyone in the music industry.
I could just move on to data. Do you provide the same user data to the independent sector as part of your licensing deals with indie labels and self-releasing artists? And if not, why is the data only shared with the majors?
Well, we provide a vast amount of data to a number of all labels, independent or majors. We actually make available APIs, application programming interfaces, through which they can have access to that. We provide a service called Spotify for labels, a service called Spotify for publishers, and a service called Spotify for artists that actually makes available to each of them relevant data that was never made available before the advent of streaming. So I would say, we are right now in an era of transparency of data in terms of how music is performing on the service that I think is above anything that was available before.
And you'd say that you provide that data equitably across your platform, whether it's the majors or other providers?
Correct. And if you look at our Spotify for Artists, that's a sort of very successful tool that we make available to artists with all of the data around sort of real-time information about the performance of their music. That is a free application that we make available to artists directly. And I think that has really been a game changer for artists in terms of shaping their career.
Thank you. Can I just move on to briefly to Apple, to Eleanor? Do you use streaming data for Apple Music users for your identifier for the advertiser system?
Well, we don't have advertising on our service. We're not an ad-supported service, and the only ways in which we use data are play data that enables us to pay royalties, and in certain ways to allow for personalization of the service to make it better for consumers. We have spoken very frequently and vociferously about our belief that privacy is a fundamental human right. And whenever we do make any data available, whenever we use any data, we always make sure the consumer knows how we're using that data, and we absolutely do not sell it in any kind of way.
And you delayed the changes to iOS 14 until and implementing that until early next year. How does that benefit the creators in music, or was that to pacify app developers who were concerned about the impact on their businesses?
Honestly, our iOS software business is very, very separate from my part of the business. So I really can't speak to reasons for that today at all, I'm afraid.
Okay, and can I just ask Amazon, do you use a user's streaming data for other Amazon services and vice versa? And in particular, when it comes to shopping on your main platform or advertising your delivery for third-party websites, I mean, how do you protect people's data and their privacy from being abused? I mean, you've got to hold an incredible amount of data as an organisation. So how do you prevent people being overwhelmed by just the amount of information that you hold on them, and that being abused by people who are on your platform?
Well, customer trust is one of the central things we focus on Amazon. We know that trust is hard to win and very easy to lose, and we absolutely obsess over ensuring that customers' data is stored in a way which we know they would be happy about. We do not make any personally identifiable data available to advertisers when they are advertising on our platforms. What we do is we group customers together into people who like certain things, and we give people access to those groups. So we don't make anything that's personally identifiable available. As I say, customer trust is something we take very seriously indeed.
Can I just go back to Horatio just briefly on the answers you gave earlier on autoplay? Is it just data on the individual that drives autoplay and the selections that it makes through the algorithms, or is there any other factors that can influence that? For instance, could there be any commercial considerations that would influence what you push towards somebody through autoplay?
So when it comes to autoplay and radio, we recently announced a couple of services that we make available to artists. One of them is Discovery Mode. And in Discovery Mode, we actually, for those listening scenarios in which the user isn't actively picking, we provide an opportunity for artists to promote their tracks in those limited scenarios. So we obviously take into account a number of factors. There's a variety of signals that are taken into account. The music has to perform well in those scenarios or it would come off. But in fact, one of the paths that we are trying to develop as a platform in order to expand our margins is to make available to artists and their labels the possibility to have their tracks pitched for inclusion into autoplay and things like that. We don't guarantee placement. Once again, the music has to meet the technical requirements. It has to fit sort of the profile, the listening profile of the users. But that is something that we have been experimenting on. So that is something that we have talked publicly about also. So
just so quick, if I'm listening to Spotify and I do what Kevin just did and allow what I've chosen, selected to end, what I will get next could possibly be something that someone has paid to be promoted in my direction. Is that right? I mean, I accept that you wouldn't switch from classical music to heavy metal. It would have to be within that sort of zone. But that is right. Is it that I can get? I could receive autoplay that is being paid for.
Well, there is no upfront fee whatsoever, but it is possible that some of the tracks in the list that will be served to you are tracks that artists have asked to spotlight. And if they perform well, there is in fact a discount that we benefit from in terms of the royalties. So it's a form of marketing on it. It isn't, to be clear, it is in very limited surfaces like autoplay, where that is available. That does not affect the vast majority of the playlist on the service.
So I mean, I'm just trying to understand it. So what would you say is a percentage of what comes through autoplay is people paying for their material to be advertised?
Well, these are essentially experiments that are beginning at this point. So I would expect that this time the numbers are very small. We have only a handful of participating labels at this time. On the whole, the label, by the way, that includes independent labels, not just major labels. On the whole, those labels have increased their royalties by using the promotion. Otherwise, they wouldn't use it. On the whole, by offering the discount for inclusion in those limited scenarios, they end up making more money. Is a form of marketing and promotion of their music that on a net basis ends up benefiting them.
So forgive me because I'm trying to understand it. So isn't this though favouring those that have the resources to be able to pay? So isn't it going to be the majors promoting their artists that are likely to dominate? What gets what is played through autoplay?
As a matter of fact, it doesn't, because it does not require any upfront fee. So you don't have to have money to participate in the program. We benefit because of the increased streaming of the track. We get a discount on that. Just think as we're being paid for how the track performed. And the early test, again, this is a very early stage of testing. We have seen that in discovery mode, which is what this feature is called, labels have had their streams grow by 30% when they use this, which means they obviously receive higher royalties when they participate in the program. Independent labels have access to it. All the labels have access to it. They don't need to make an economic commitment up front. And on the whole, what we are seeing is that it ends up increasing their royalties. So in a sense, it could be a great equalizer for independent labels to have access to these marketing and promotion tools, which they would have had to pay someone out of pocket outside of Spotify in order to get that kind of increased exposure.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no more questions, Jeff.
Thank you, Clive. Horatio, just a final question to you. You've mentioned a couple of times about major labels and passive shareholding. What safeguards are in place to ensure that shareholding remains passive?
So they have very small percentage ownership. They don't have board membership, so they're not present in our board. So they're not present in any of our corporate or strategic decisions. They have no influence or presence in our operations. So it's, I think, the very definition of a passive investment. I would say that, I believe that two of the major labels continue to hold some equity holding, haven't sold out all of the equity that they had in the beginning. I believe one of them sold all of the stock that they had in the company. It really doesn't affect their relationship with us, whether they do or don't have an equity participation in Spotify in any way. Okay.
Why do you think they have it then? Was it purely just to effectively make the most of your growth?
I think it was, again, this was negotiated before my time, but I believe it was a way of aligning the interest of those companies that, remember, there was a time in the history of Spotify where our viability and survival was very much in question, where labels were incredibly skeptical about our ability to deliver the number of subscriptions and the economic returns that they're seeing now. And, I believe that was a way of ensuring that they had a stake on the success of the company that would benefit, once again, the artists they represent.
So effectively, they were cut in at that point because they wanted you wanted effectively their participation as much as possible at that point in order to grow your business. That sounds like the arrangement.
Yes, we wanted them to have a stake in the success of the company so that they would work with us to make streaming possible, as opposed to work against us in the process.
And over time, presumably, that relationship now was they've seen it works, and therefore they've made their money. As you say, one of the major labels has sold all its stock, and therefore, what would have been I'd imagine that in the early days, they'd have had quite a bit of influence, because obviously you'd have wanted to effectively, as you say, keep them on side. But now that influence has declined.
Well, I mean, I think you yourself mentioned that a very high percentage of the content that gets streamed on our services is still provided by the three major labels. So I think it would be an overstatement to say that their influence has waned, but their influence is exercised the way it's supposed to be exercised, and that is through the negotiation of the terms and conditions of the license agreements that we negotiate with them, as opposed to in any way dictating or interfering with operational decisions of the company.
Yeah, no, we take your word for it as the case right now. You state that they have very little influence, they have very small shareholdings, etc. But there was a point in time when Spotify, as you say, was struggling because of basically to try and grab the attention of the major labels, and they took a stake in your company. Was that the moment really when this model we came up with this model in terms of the distribution of revenues? And is that reflective of their influence at the outset?
I don't believe it was the same moment, although I as I said, this sort of predated my relationship with Spotify. But I believe that the rev share arrangements predated the equity arrangements. I'm not certain on that. I would have to go and check the records too.
Yeah, could you check the records? And so I'm just intrigued as to that relationship at the outset between the major labels and yourselves, and whether or not that has actually led to the ecosystem we now have, the economics of music streaming, which is the point of this particular inquiry. I mean, we're willing to take at face value, as you say, that they have no influence on your day-to-day running of a business now, but they may have had quite a considerable influence on the genesis of your business. So we'd be really intrigued to hear about that. My final question, though, is to Mr. Firth.
Can I just add one short statement with respect to that?
Yeah.
With all due respect and in all honesty, I think the equity ownership impact is being overstated. They have considerable influence, given that they own the intellectual property associated with their catalog, which represents the overwhelming majority of the content that gets streamed on the service. I don't believe they need more influence. And I personally don't believe that equity ownership in any way enhanced the influence that they had, other than every few years sitting at a table and potentially stating that unless you agree to their terms, you wouldn't have a license to have their content on the service. That balance and that normal tension between a supplier of content and a distributor of content, those dynamics are quite tense as they are. And I personally don't believe a minority equity stake would have in any way either enhanced or diminished that.
Well, I think the point is it may not be about the minority equity stake, but it's indicative of a moment in time when you were, how can I put it, there's an English phrase for it, over a barrel, and they have basically been able to take advantage of that over a period of time. One of the reasons why perhaps the business is not profitable at this time. However, look, we're probably going to get sidetracked in that respect, but I just think it'd be really interesting if you could write to us on the matters that you discussed. Thank you. My final question is to you, Mr. Firth. You mentioned to my colleague about you effectively, in response to his question concerning data, you said you package up the data and offer that to advertisers. Could you give me an example of how that would work?
Sorry, I may have misinformed you there. It's not about offering it to advertisers. We use it to ensure that adverts that are played are relevant to the customer who hears it. So it doesn't leave Amazon. We do not sell our data at all, but we do play adverts to people that match something that we know about them. So it's just about their listening habits or what else we know about them. So it's more about ensuring advertising is relevant than it is about anything else. Apologies if I
But you presumably you sell to those advertisers the fact that you have this capability and that they can effectively they can buy into this group of individuals, say, by a certain age demographic or even a band choice.
Well, we don't do it that way, actually. It's more about, fashionistas or coffee lovers or things that we could know about them. Not you can necessarily tell that from music listening, but we don't really hold demographic data. I know it's unusual. I was asked earlier about the amount of data Amazon has. We don't hold demographic data. It's not something that customers give us when they first sign up. What we do hold is what they listen to. And while you may be able to make some assumptions from that, we can offer people a chance to talk to rock fans or something like that. So it's around bringing together what we can know, but we don't hold demographics as a whole.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for your evidence today. Paul Firth, Horacio Gutierrez and Eleanor Siegel. I think it's been an intriguing session, and I know it's overrun, but I think that we've covered a lot of ground here. So thank you for that, and thank you for your openness. Order.
Thank you,
order.
Thank you.
So thanks for watching, and that concludes the present coverage of the sessions into the economics of music streaming. I'll post updates and information when they come available, so if you want to be notified when I post new content, ding that little bell, and a subscription to the channel would be much appreciated. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers now. Bye bye.